Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by GrandTheftWorld.com. It's April 3rd, 2022, or 2022, as we like to call it. This is episode 74, and it has something to do with the World Government Summit.
Are we ready for a new world order?
We'll get to that in a few minutes. You guys don't know about that because you've been watching the slap heard around the world and every comedian's variation on that whole topic.
Hi, I'm a comedian, but I also know that making fun of people's bald wives is no laughing matter. A lot of people are of the mind that nothing should be off limits in comedy, but I'm of the mind that one thing should be off limits, and that's making fun of people's bald wives. When your bald wife's thinking about attending a show, she shouldn't have to be worried about whether it's one of those comedians who's gonna make fun of bald wives. Hollywood award shows are a place for celebrating heroes, and not a place to make bald wife jokes at the expense of Will Smith's bald wife. You know, it's one thing if your bald wife wants to make bald wife jokes at her own expense, but it's not the comedian's place to decide whether this is a time for those bald wife jokes. When Michael Richards hit the stage at the Laugh Factory, he said some of the worst slurs imaginable, except for making fun of bald wives. Because even Michael Richards knew that bald wife jokes are a line that should not be crossed. If you see a comedian making a bald wife joke at a show, it's up to us to hold that comedian accountable and say, hey, bald wife jokes are not okay. Comedy has rules, like the rule of 3 things that are not allowed: sexism, racism, and bald wife jokes, in that order. In the odd case, after a comedian finishes his or her medical assessment of the audience and finds out that one of the bald wives in the crowd was a bald wife as a result of a fashion statement and not a medical situation, even then I would handle that bald wife joke with extreme caution. If you want to make fun of the fact that someone's bald wife is having sex with his son's friends, then be my guest. But if you want to bring his bald wife's hairdo into the equation, you no longer have my stamp of approval. And despite the fact that edgelords like Chris Rock think that bald wife jokes should be okay, I hope that we can move forward to a bald wife joke-free society where comedians come together in unison to say, no, I will not make bald wife jokes. And bald wife jokes are never okay.
I mean, it's a sad story in totality for people's attention spans. In the past week, I mean, when I tuned into Twitter last Sunday or Monday, I guess it was Monday morning, the entire Twitter feed looked like a Twitter thread. It was all just one thing. I was like, what is going on? What did I miss? And yeah, Will Smith went from pimping to simping in just a few sentences. And he kind of sat down like a pimp. He walked back with the swagger. And then now he has had to resign from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I know we're all sad about that. And while that was going on, while you guys were all watching that, the World Government Summit happened. All of a sudden, they're saying the quiet parts out loud.
We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
In fact, day 1, presentation 1, first 10 minutes, New World Order. How do we create a New World Order? What do you think? What do you think?
Are you ready for a new world order?
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71, and so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens. In my opinion, we're going to need a digital constitution of human rights if we're going to have digital money. But also, this new money will be sovereign in nature. Most people think that digital money is crypto and private, but what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The US is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well. And the question is, will that new system of digital money and digital accounting accommodate the competing needs of the citizens of all these locations so that every human being has a chance to have a better life? Because that's the only measure of whether a world order really serves. What I see as someone involved in technology, someone involved with entrepreneurs and advising governments, I see a future where we genuinely have ubiquity and not scarcity. I see a future where the internet is available for free for everyone in the most remote locations on the planet, for example. And that means the location of power is going to shift. And I see, as a person in financial markets, decentralization of power structures everywhere, in finance, in political power. And in fact, this conflict that we're in right now may be the beginning of that shift.
The last speaker we heard, she talked about decentralization. First off, we got to bring internet to everybody. And there's, 1/3 of the world's population doesn't have internet. They're not bringing it to liberate people, because they ain't using it right now to liberate people. They're censoring people. They're undermining people with it. So when she sees naively, like optimistically, this technology is going to permeate, we're going to get these people to internet, and power will decentralize both financially and technologically to these people. No, here's how it's going to work. They're going to decentralize centralized intelligence as far as spy networks and surveillance, and they're going to put it on us, in us, as they've already done on the phones and the computers. The other aspect is they're going to decentralize, yes, banking, and give internet people. They want to bring the internet and banking to all these people, but that's for tracking. These central bank digital currencies are going to be there to see your whole life's everything, completely
Larry
transparent.
Fink and Karsten
dude.
and BlackRock.
So she's one of those naive, seems to be well-meaning people who gets up on stage and they're like, we value your perspective, right? But that's not what they're doing in reality. So she either knows that and doesn't disclose that, or she doesn't know that and she's up there supporting an agenda.
科学防疫，文明随行。戴口罩，勤洗手，勤消毒，少聚众，勤通风。科学防疫，文明随行。
那怎么是拿法吗？对，它不是那么玩意儿。我就看二维码扫描，你把手拿走。看出来这手拿拿。
The epidemic of attention span loss from the slap heard around the world. I think you should take some of that attention. If you spent half hour, 2 hours in the past week looking at Will Smith, ha-has, maybe take an hour or two and dip into the World Government Summit. Now, you need a map to that summit. And thankfully, we're going to have some guests tonight. We had Ryan Christian. He's scheduled for tonight. He's been scheduled for like a month, but it was his site, The Last American Vagabond, who published Derek Rose's recent article this past week. And it's titled something to the effect of, while you guys are all watching Will Smith, these guys had a World Government Summit. So Derek has a brilliant article, which I have printed here. We're going to go into a little bit later with him. So the juxtaposition of having Ryan already scheduled and having Derek write this article and print it on Ryan's site, we're going to actually have two guests tonight in the lineup.
If it came to actual kinetic war on a major worldwide scale, I don't think these people would care even remotely, to be quite honest. But I don't think that's what they want, because I don't think that, I mean, anybody could point out why a massive outbreak of war, whether nuclear or just, just generally, kinetic, I guess nuclear is kinetic, but just not nuclear, would counter what they're trying to accomplish with the Great Reset. In every possible way.
That's what
right?
I say as well. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's more about a means to an end, right? They're trying to scare you into control. I mean, look at what they started to lose from COVID-19. They've regained with fear pushed from this, and whether that maintains or not is up for discussion. And I also don't think that I mean, there's a lot of ways you could look at it. I mean, the climate change part of this is going to come in at some point as well. I think it's just trying to keep everybody corralled in this direction, and they lost control of it. I really believe they lost control of the narrative around COVID-19 because of people like you, because of the independent media. I believe that.
They have a decision tree. I can imagine some sort of software, right? And so they've got these goals, and these goals never go away, but they either shift them faster or slower, right? So they were growing really fast with COVID, bumping into a whole bunch of data that goes against that. Let's slow that down. Let's speed up this other one to let this grow behind the scenes, right? Because when I think back to like 1908, Carnegie Endowment in their minutes from the Reese Committee investigation, the first thing they figured out, is there any greater way to change a society other than warfare? And then they found out, no, there's no greater way to change society other than warfare. Then how do they take control of warfare? They took care, the State Department then they educate people, right? But going back to this idea of Great Reset could be counter to World War III, like World War III could wipe away their Great Reset. I see them as either way, they get their Great Reset if they continue unchallenged, right? Because H.G. Wells's Things to Come, which was the movie version of his book called Shape of Things to Come from like 1938, right before he wrote New World Order in 1939. 1938, they came out with Shape of Things to Come, and in there's like a nuclear war, and it sends almost the whole planet back to the Stone Age.
Yeah.
And you think in this movie, because you're in like Act 2 of watching the 1938 MI6 production of Things to Come, and the whole world is desolate, and it's gangs and rocks and clubs, right? And you think this is it until Wings Over the World comes flying in, and technology has been preserved, and there is a new world order, and there's a big gap, like Elysium gap, between the slaves on the planet and the ruling elite who have power of the skies and the air. So I could see either way. Like, you're right. I don't think they care if it breaks out in a world war. I don't think they care really if it even goes kinetic and hot with thermonuclear weapons in a limited warfare Kissingerian type of way, and not the whole planet. Just like, oh, Ukraine had some stuff happen or whatever. And I think that they have a way to make their plans come about, whether we accepted the narrative without resistance on COVID, or they switch gears and they bring this back over next season.
Yeah.
Wait, to the point about the medical part of it, and I agree, Richard, totally an interesting way to look at it, that it's about the way that they perceived it then, like how do we control the population using warfare? And obviously that's been something they've used and almost perfected to a degree for a long time, as long as they don't care about the casualties of civilians, which clearly they don't. But what's interesting is you can look back, I forget the date, I was actually just looking for, I think it was early 1900s, the Flexner Report, right?
Yeah.
And the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, and how it's very clearly, in my opinion, they were aware of how this could be utilized, but I think they recognize that we're not there yet. We don't have the technology yet. We understand it though. So we need to wrangle in the medical side of this. And by the way, and as Corbett points out, how and why big oil conquered the world, and how they fractured Rockefellers and acting like they were breaking them up, it really gave them more control and more influence, more money. And then ever since then, what they do, they drove the entire medical industry into the petrochemical pill form kind of idea. I mean, welcome Pfizer, welcome everything else. Like that's the beginning. And now once we get to the point that they can start realizing what they wanted, the nanotechnology, the implantables, they're like, okay, security state becomes biosecurity state. What do we need? Some kind of action, some kind of pandemic, and maybe it was just organic, and they go, perfect, we'll use it. I mean, who knows? I don't think necessarily, I think there's much more obvious manipulation, but this is just my theory, obviously, but I think it's interesting to see how there's been planning for this for a long time. And so it really just becomes one and the same. It is still the war manipulation, but it's a war on you. It's a war on a virus.
It's a psy war.
Yes.
It's a psy war more than anything. And what it really spells out, I mean, and I agree with the elements of your theory, but long term, that means they've been talking about this. They've designed and sort of like planned for this over a century.
But before we can get to special guests and all the clips from the week and these sort of things, we got to hand it to Maxine Waters. She has finally, last week we had a problem with a Supreme Court justice nominee who couldn't define woman. Maxine Waters has come out to the public, and she has defined for us what it means to be tone deaf. We're going to hand it off to Luke Radowski of wearechange.org and bestpoliticaltshirts.com for the kickoff. Let's go to Maxine Waters and her defining tone deaf.
Wilson. Another location where they're taking F's. Is there any more locations than this one?
No, it might have been. There's so many people out here.
1 minute.
I want everybody to go home. And I want
We don't got no home. Okay. That's why we here. Miss Miss Waters, can you home? We gonna go too.
Yeah. Just a moment. Just a moment. Nothing is going to happen here today. Nothing is going to happen anymore today.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that is U.S. Congressman Maxine Waters telling a bunch of homeless people to go home. If there ever was a more perfect representation of what's going on financially right now, this would be it.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.